Homeless at 16, she inherited an abandoned flower farm, then found what changed her life. It wasn't about the property or the money. It was about a promise kept across a decade of silence, and the truth buried under half a foot of dust and a lifetime of weeds. If you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, like you were just a name on a file folder, I want you to stick around, and let's get into it. The clock on the wall of the County Services Building ticked with a special kind of institutional slowness. Each second was a thick, syrupy drop landing in a pool of stale, recycled air. It was my 18th birthday. For most people, that meant a party, a car, a cake with too many candles. For me, it meant I was officially no longer a ward of the state. It meant I was aging out. The final tick of the clock before my case manager, Ms. Albright, would call me in for my final meeting. Freedom, they called it. It felt more like being pushed off a boat in the middle of a very gray, very cold ocean. I had a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes, a worn-out paperback, and a bus token. I had a list of shelters and a final, pathetic check for $200. Happy birthday to me. 2 years in the system, bouncing between 3 group homes after my grandmother had disappeared. That's the word they used. One day she was there, the next she wasn't. I was 16. They found me in the small apartment we'd been renting, rent 3 weeks overdue, landlord threatening to call the police. The state stepped in, and now the state was stepping out. Ms. Albright's office smelled like weak coffee and disinfectant. She was a tired woman with kind eyes who was fighting a losing battle against paperwork. Piles of it flanked her on her desk like crumbling beige mountains. My file was on top. It wasn't very thick. Ilara Vance, born to parents I never knew, raised by grandmother, Lena Vance, until age 16. No other known relatives. "Well, Ilara," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is it. You're an adult." She slid an envelope across the desk, the check. "I know it's not much, but it's what the state provides for transitional assistance." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. I just wanted it to be over. I wanted to walk out the door and be invisible. She started going through the list of resources, her voice a low, steady drone. I stared at a water stain on the ceiling that looked like a sad, lopsided map of a country I'd never visit. I had become an expert at dissociating in rooms like this. It was a survival skill. Go somewhere else in your head, somewhere quiet. For me, it was often a half-remembered feeling of cool, dark soil in my hands, the scent of rain on petals. A memory from a life before the city, before the small apartments and the constant moving. A memory of my grandmother's hands, which always had dirt under the nails. "Ilara?" Ms. Albright's voice cut through the fog. "Are you listening?" I blinked. "Yes, sorry." "It's a lot to take in," she said, her expression softening. "I know this is scary." I just wanted to tell her that scary didn't cover it. Scary was a monster under the bed. This was a quiet, crushing emptiness, a void. She sighed, tapping a pen on my file. "There's one more thing. It's unusual. I got a call this morning from a lawyer." My stomach clenched. Lawyer. That word never meant anything good. It meant eviction, or custody, or something I'd done wrong. A lawyer? For me? "Yes, a Mr. Davies. He said it was urgent he speak with you today, on your 18th birthday specifically. He said it concerns the estate of Lena Vance." My grandmother's name felt like a stone in my mouth. The estate. That was a word for people with houses and money, not for people who disappeared from a rented room in the middle of the night. We didn't have an estate, I said, my voice flat. We had debt. Ms. Albright shrugged, a gesture of bureaucratic helplessness. I don't know the details, Ilara. He was very insistent. He said your grandmother left explicit instructions. He's waiting for you. His office is downtown. She wrote an address on a sticky note. The paper was bright, cheerful yellow. It felt like a joke. The world was ending in beige and gray, and here was this little square of sunshine. I took it. My fingers felt numb. What could a lawyer possibly want? To inform me I'd inherited more debt? To serve me papers for some mess my grandmother had left behind? A part of me, the cynical, bruised part that had grown a thick shell over the last 2 years, wanted to rip up the note and walk straight to the bus station. Disappear, just like she did. But another part, a smaller, more fragile part, felt a tiny, dangerous flicker of something. It wasn't hope. It was just curiosity. The not knowing was somehow worse than the certainty of being alone. Okay, I whispered. Okay, I'll go. The law office of Davies and Finch was in one of those old downtown buildings with a marble lobby and a slow, creaky elevator that smelled of brass polish and old paper. It was a world away from the county services building. Here, the air was quiet and heavy with the scent of leather and money. I felt instantly out of place in my worn jeans and faded hoodie. The receptionist looked me up and down, her polite smile tightening just a fraction. Can I help you? I'm here to see Mr. Davies. My name is Ilara Vance. Her eyebrows shot up. Oh, yes, he's been expecting you. Please, have a seat. Mr. Davies was an older man, tall and thin, with a neatly trimmed white beard and glasses perched on the end of his nose. He didn't look like a predator. He looked like someone's grandfather. His office was lined with books, not just law tomes, but novels and poetry. He stood up when I entered and shook my hand. His grip was firm and dry. Ms. Vance, Ilara, thank you for coming. Please. He gestured to a leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. He sat opposite me, folding his hands on his large oak desk. He didn't have a file for me. He had a single, thick, cream-colored envelope. I was your grandmother's lawyer, he began, his voice calm and even. I've known Lena for a very long time, since before you were born. He paused, letting that sink in. Someone had known her. Someone remembered her as more than a name on a missing persons report. As per her legally binding instructions, I was to contact you on your 18th birthday and present you with your inheritance. He slid the envelope across the desk. My name was written on the front in my grandmother's familiar, spidery script. Inheritance. There was that word again. I stared at it. I don't understand, I said. We had nothing. She worked 2 jobs. We were always behind on something. On the surface, yes, Mr. Davies said. Your grandmother was a very private person, and very determined. She owned a piece of property, Ilara, outright, a place called Blackwood Flower Farm. It was in her family for generations. The name hit me like a physical blow. Blackwood, flowers, the smell of soil and rain. The fragmented memories suddenly coalesced into a hazy picture. A small house, huge, sagging greenhouses with broken panes of glass, fields of overgrown things that were once orderly rows. I hadn't been there since I was 6 or 7. I thought I'd imagined it. I remember, I started, but my voice trailed off. Yes, he said gently. You lived there for a time, before she moved you both to the city. He let out a long, slow breath. Now for the difficult part. The property is yours. The deed is in this envelope. However, the farm has not been operational for over a decade. It has fallen into disrepair, and more pressingly, it has accrued significant back taxes. He named a number that made the air leave my lungs. $52,481. The 200 in my transitional assistance envelope felt like a cruel joke. The county has placed a lien on the property, he continued, his tone all business now. They will seize it and auction it off in 90 days if the debt is not paid. I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my chest. Of course it wasn't a gift. It was a burden, a ghost property with a ghost debt. It was all part of the same cosmic joke. So I've inherited a $50,000 bill, I said, the bitterness coating my tongue. Effectively, yes, he said, without flinching. However, there is another option. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a different folder. This one was glossy, modern. The logo on the front read, Oak Ridge Holdings. A development corporation has been trying to acquire the land for several years. They want to build luxury condos. They know about the tax lien. They've made an offer. He opened the folder. A letter of intent, a purchase agreement, and a number. $200,000. My brain struggled to process it. It was an impossible sum, a fairy tale number. They are offering to buy the property as is, Mr. Davies explained. Their offer is $200,000. From that, we would settle the tax lien of, let's call it $53,000. My legal fees for facilitating the transaction would be $2,000. That would leave you with a net sum of $145,000. He let the number hang in the air. $145,000. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a car. It was a different life. It was a clean slate. An apartment without a slumlord. Food in the fridge. The ability to go to college, maybe. The ability to be a person, not a problem. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. Give away a place I barely remembered. A place that was nothing but weeds and debt. It was the smart thing to do, the only thing to do. Your grandmother, Mr. Davies said, his voice softer again, refused to sell. Right up to the end. She was adamant. This developer, Oak Ridge, they were very persistent. Some might say predatory. She never told me why she was so set on keeping it. She just said it had to be there for you. I looked from the glossy corporate folder to the old cream-colored envelope with my name on it. 2 futures. One was easy, clean, and paid for in cash. A final transaction, cutting the last thread to a past that had only ever brought me instability and pain. The other was, what? A trip to a derelict farm in the middle of nowhere to see what $50,000 of debt looked like before the county took it. It was illogical, pointless, and yet, why had she held on so tightly? Why had she refused an offer that could have solved all her problems? I have the deed of sale right here, Mr. Davies said, tapping the Oak Ridge folder. You could sign it today. Within a week, The money would be in an account for you. You would be free and clear. Free. That word again. But selling something I'd never seen felt like a different kind of prison. It felt like agreeing that my grandmother's last, desperate act of holding on was meaningless. It felt like selling her ghost. "What if I don't sign?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What happens then?" Mr. Davies leaned back in his chair, studying me over his glasses. "Then the property remains yours, for 90 days. You can go there. You can see it. You can try to figure something out, or you can do nothing. And at the end of the 90 days, the county takes it. You get nothing. And Oak Ridge probably buys it from the auction for a fraction of the price." He paused. "Your grandmother also left you this." He handed me a small, tarnished silver key. "It's the key to the house. And this. A bus ticket, one way, to a town called Havenwood, a town I hadn't heard of in 10 years. The destination printed on the ticket was a crossroads, not a station. Route 4 and Blackwood Lane. The bus left in the morning. The next morning, I was at the bus station an hour before departure. The $200 from Ms. Albright was still in its envelope, but it felt different now. It wasn't my entire net worth anymore. It was just pocket money. The scale of my life had been warped overnight. I was simultaneously broke and the owner of something worth $250,000, a debt of $50,000, and a legacy I didn't understand. I chose the bus ticket. I told Mr. Davies. I needed to see it first. He had nodded slowly, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Approval? Pity? He gave me his card. "Call me any time. The offer from Oak Ridge stands. They want that land, Alara. They'll wait. For a little while." The bus ride was long, 8 hours. It pulled out of the city's grimy, diesel-choked terminal and onto the highway, leaving the skyline to shrink in the rearview mirror. For the first few hours, I just watched the urban sprawl give way to suburbs, then to strip malls, then to fields. I watched the people get on and off. A soldier in uniform, a young mother with a crying baby, an old man who smelled of wintergreen. Each of them was going somewhere, from somewhere. I was just going. I didn't know what I was going toward. I was just running from the life that had been laid out for me, the one that ended in a shelter. The further the bus traveled, the more the landscape changed. The flat gray concrete of the city was replaced by the rolling green of the countryside. The sky seemed to get bigger, wider. The air coming through the crack in my window started to smell different. Not of exhaust and hot garbage, but of damp earth, of cut grass, of rain that was coming but hadn't arrived yet. I tried to sleep, but my mind was a churning mess of numbers and questions. $145,000. Why would she turn that down? What could possibly be worth more than that kind of security? We had lived on expired mac and cheese and day-old bread. I wore shoes with holes in them. She worked until she was exhausted, her hands raw from cleaning chemicals at her night job, her back aching from her day job as a waitress. And all that time, she owned a farm? It didn't make sense. It felt like a betrayal. Why let us live like that? Why let me end up in the system if she had this asset all along? The anger was a hot, familiar coal in my chest. It was easier to feel angry than to feel the grief that lay beneath it. The grief for the grandmother who had been my entire world, and then had vanished without a word. Disappeared. That was the official story. She left for work one night and never came back. No note, no explanation. Just an absence that tore a hole in my life. And now I was supposed to believe she had done it all for me, that she had left me this broken-down farm on purpose. The bus rumbled on. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the trees blur past. Memories, faint and slippery as fish, started to surface. The squeak of a porch swing, the sweet, heavy scent of lilies, my grandmother's voice, humming a tune I couldn't place. Her hands, not raw from bleach, but covered in dark, rich soil, showing me how to place a tiny seed into a tiny hole. "Everything wants to grow, Elara," she'd said. "You just have to give it a chance. A little bit of light, a little bit of water, and a reason." I must have drifted off, because I was startled awake by the bus driver calling out, "Route 4 and Blackwood Lane. Next stop." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. I grabbed my duffel bag and made my way to the front of the bus. The driver gave me a curious look. "You sure this is your stop, miss? Ain't nothing out here." "I'm sure," I said. The bus hissed to a stop at a lonely intersection marked by a leaning, moss-covered sign. One arm pointed down Route 4. The other, nearly illegible, pointed down a narrow, unpaved road. Blackwood Lane. The doors opened, and I stepped out. The bus pulled away, its red tail lights shrinking into the distance, leaving me in a profound and sudden silence. It was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall trees that lined the lane. The air was thick with the smell of damp leaves and pine. It was the end of the day. The sky was a bruised purple and orange. I stood there for a long moment, just breathing. It felt like I had been holding my breath for 2 years. I slung the duffel bag over my shoulder and started walking down Blackwood Lane. The road was more of a suggestion, 2 dirt ruts overgrown with weeds. After about a quarter of a mile, I saw it, a rusted wrought iron gate hanging open on one hinge. One of the posts had a wooden sign, so weathered it was almost gray, but I could just make out the carved letters. Blackwood Flower Farm. I had arrived. The driveway was long, and the trees on either side had grown so thick they formed a canopy, dappling the path in shadow, even in the fading light. It felt like walking into a tunnel, a passage to another time. And then the tunnel opened up, and I saw the house. It was a simple 2-story farmhouse, once white, now a peeling gray. The roof on the porch sagged dangerously. Windows were dark and blank like vacant eyes. To the left were the greenhouses. I remembered them being vast and shimmering. Now they were skeletal, frames of rusted metal with jagged shards of glass clinging to them like broken teeth. The fields beyond were a riot of weeds and wildflowers, a chaotic tapestry of green and gold and purple. It wasn't abandoned, it was wild. It looked like the land was patiently, methodically taking back everything that had been built on it. My heart sank. This wasn't a farm, it was a ruin. The $145,000 felt very real, and this place felt like a dream, a decaying memory. What was I doing here? I walked up the 3 creaky steps to the porch, my footsteps loud in the stillness. I found the loose stone by the door, the one she always told me was the house's secret keeper. My fingers closed around the cold, tarnished silver key Mr. Davies had given me. It slid into the lock with a rusty scrape. I turned it. The click of the bolt retracting was like a gunshot in the quiet. I pushed the door open. A wave of stale, musty air washed over me. The smell of dust, of time, of a life paused mid-sentence. The inside of the house was a time capsule. Everything was covered in a thick layer of gray dust, but it was all still there. A simple wooden table and two chairs in the kitchen, a cracked mug by the sink. In the living room, a sofa with faded floral upholstery, an armchair, and a stone fireplace. A stack of books on a small table, their spines warped by damp. It was as if she had just walked out and never come back, which, I supposed, was exactly what had happened. But this wasn't the apartment she'd disappeared from. This was a different place, a different life. Why had she left this to come to the city? Why trade this for a cramped, miserable room? I ran a finger through the dust on the mantelpiece. It came away gray. My gaze fell on a metal box sitting in the center of the mantel. A simple, gray cash box. It was locked. I tried to lift it, but it was heavy, bolted to the mantel itself. My breath caught. Maybe this was it. Maybe she had left money. Maybe this was the answer to the tax problem. I searched the room, my movements frantic now. In the kitchen drawers, under the sofa cushions, in the pockets of an old coat hanging by the door. No key. I sat down on the dusty floor, my hope deflating as quickly as it had risen. Of course it wasn't that easy. Nothing was ever easy. I felt exhausted, defeated. The house was cold, the sun had set, and I was alone in a ruin with a locked box and a mountain of debt. I was an idiot for coming here. I should have signed the papers. I should have taken the money. I pulled my knees to my chest and wrapped my arms around them, trying to conserve some warmth. My eyes scanned the room again, slower this time, looking for anything, any clue. My gaze landed on the stack of books by the armchair. They were mostly gardening almanacs and poetry collections. The top one was a well-worn copy of Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman. It had been her favorite. She used to read it to me. I picked it up. The cover was soft with age. A slip of paper was sticking out from the pages. A bookmark. I opened it to the marked page. It wasn't a bookmark. It was a small, flat key, taped to the page with yellowed tape. And underneath it, a single line was underlined in faint pencil. Keep your face always toward the sunshine, and shadows will fall behind you. My hand was trembling as I peeled the key from the page. It was small and intricate, not for a door. It was for the box. I scrambled back to the fireplace, my heart pounding. The key slid into the lock on the metal box. It turned. The lid popped open with a soft click. I lifted it, expecting to see stacks of cash, a solution to all my problems. But it wasn't money. It was letters, dozens of them, bundled in stacks by year, tied with faded garden twine, and on top of the first bundle, a single envelope, separate from the rest. On the front, in her familiar spidery handwriting, it just said, "For Elara, when you're ready." My hands shook as I untied the twine. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age. I pulled out the first letter, dated 2 weeks after she disappeared. My vision blurred with tears as I began to read her words. "My dearest Elara," it began. "My little sparrow, if you are reading this, it means 2 things. First, that you have come back to Blackwood, and second, that I am gone. I need you to know that not a day has passed, not a single minute, where my heart has not been with you. I know you are hurt. I know you are angry. You have every right to be. I need you to understand why I did what I did. It was not abandonment, my love. It was the only way I could protect you." I had to stop, my breath catching in a sob. I pressed a hand to my mouth, stifling the sound. Protect me? How was leaving me to the mercy of the state protecting me? I forced myself to keep reading. "Your grandfather, a man I loved, but who made some terrible choices. Got himself into debt with a very dangerous man before you were born. It was not a bank loan. It was the kind of debt that isn't measured in money, but in fear. When your grandfather died, that man decided the debt passed to me, and he made it clear that if I couldn't pay, the debt would one day pass to you. He was a patient man. He liked to watch people suffer. For years I paid him. I sold off everything but this land. This land was your great-grandmother's, and her mother's before that. It is part of our blood. I would not let him have it. I worked, I scraped, I paid him his blood money, and I kept him away from you. We were safe here, at Blackwood. He didn't know about this place, but then he found out. He sent someone. They didn't threaten me, Alara. They watched you playing in the greenhouse. That was the threat. A cold dread washed over me, colder than the air in the house. I remembered men in a car, parked at the end of the lane. I'd thought they were lost. My grandmother had rushed me inside, her face pale as a sheet. I knew then that I couldn't keep you here, the letter continued. As long as you were with me, you were a target, a piece of leverage. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I had to make you disappear from me, so you could be safe from him. I took you to the city. I made us poor, anonymous. I made sure we had nothing he would want. And then I had to cut the last tie. I had to disappear from you. I went to that man, and I made a deal. I would give him everything I had left, and I would spend the rest of my life working off the remaining principal, in a place of his choosing, in exchange for him wiping the slate clean for you, for him forgetting your name. He agreed. The price was my freedom and my silence. I was not allowed to contact you. If I did, the deal was off. So I left. I walked away from my whole world. I let the state take you, because I knew they would keep you safe in a way I no longer could. They would give you a roof over your head and food, and you would be a number on a file, invisible to the man who wanted to harm you. It broke my heart into a million pieces, Alara, but I knew you were resilient. I knew you were a survivor. And I knew that one day you would be 18. You would be a legal adult, and you would be free. And this place, this land, would be waiting for you. It was the only thing I could give you, a place to start over, a place that is yours. It's broken, I know, but the soil is still good. The letter fell from my fingers. I couldn't see the page anymore. The tears I had held back for 2 years came in a raw, ragged flood. I cried for the 16-year-old girl, alone in that apartment, thinking she had been thrown away like trash. I cried for the grandmother, who had walked into a life of servitude to save me. I cried for the lost years, the silence I had mistaken for abandonment, the poverty I had mistaken for failure. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a sacrifice. The deepest, most painful sacrifice a person could make. She hadn't disappeared. She had been ransomed, and I was what she had bought. I sat there on the floor of the cold, dark house, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of moonlight coming through the grimy window, and I mourned the woman I had never really known, and loved her more than I could possibly say. The anger I had been nursing for 2 years was gone, washed away by a tide of grief and a fierce, burning love. This farm wasn't a ruin, it was a sanctuary. It was the physical proof of her love, standing here, waiting for me. The weight of it all, the truth, was staggering. I picked up the next bundle of letters. They were dated every month, for years. They were a journal of her life in captivity, her thoughts, her hopes for me. She wrote about the weather, about the stars, about how she hoped I was safe, hoped I was learning, hoped I hadn't forgotten the smell of lilies. She had never left me. She had been with me, every day in these pages. For a long time I just sat there, the letters clutched in my hand. The moon rose higher, casting long shadows across the floor. The initial wave of grief and shock began to recede, leaving behind a profound and aching clarity. But clarity didn't make the choice any easier. In fact, it made it harder. Before, selling the farm was just a business decision, a smart move. Get rid of a worthless, dilapidated property and walk away with life-changing money. It was the logical escape from a past I wanted to forget. But now it was Lena's legacy. It was the price of her freedom. Selling it to a developer to be bulldozed for luxury condos felt like spitting on her grave. It felt like saying her sacrifice was only worth its cash value. The $145,000 that had seemed like a lifeline now felt like blood money, a temptation, the easy way out. My grandmother had never taken the easy way out. She had chosen a life of hardship to protect me, to preserve this one piece of earth for me. How could I sell it for a quick payday? The thought made me feel sick. But what was the alternative? The $53,000 tax bill was still real. The 90-day deadline was still ticking. I had $200, a duffel bag of clothes, and no skills to speak of. How could I possibly save this place? The scale of the work was overwhelming. The house needed a new roof. The greenhouses were destroyed. The fields were a jungle. It would take a team of people and a fortune I didn't have to bring it back to life. Keeping it felt like an impossible romantic dream, a fool's errand. I was caught between two impossible choices: betray my grandmother's memory or chain myself to a failing dream that would likely swallow me whole. I felt so incredibly small, so powerless. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've stood at a crossroads where every path looked like it led off a cliff, where the choice wasn't between good and bad, but between hard and harder. It's a lonely place to be. You feel like the world is moving on around you, and you're just frozen, terrified of making the wrong move. If you're feeling that way right now, or if you've ever felt that way, I want you to just take a sec for me, but for you. Because this community we're building here is for people who understand that. People who know that the most important journeys are often the hardest ones. Your story matters, and you're not as alone as you feel. Let choice that felt like it would define the rest of your life. I read every single one, because we're all just trying to find our way back to a place that feels like home. Now, let's get back to that dusty floor in that cold, dark house. I stayed up all night reading her letters. I read about the man, the one who held her debt. His name was Silas. She described him not as a monster, but as something worse, a businessman for whom people were just assets or liabilities. She wrote about her work in a bleak industrial laundry in a town she never named, the heat, the steam, the endless hours. But even in the darkest entries, there was always a spark. She wrote about a patch of weeds behind the laundry where a single, stubborn dandelion grew. She wrote about watching the phases of the moon, and in every letter she wrote to me. I hope you are reading novels, Ilara. I hope you are looking at the stars. I hope you have found a friend who makes you laugh. It was like she was trying to build a life for me in her mind, to keep my spirit safe, even when she couldn't keep my body safe. By the time the first gray light of dawn began to creep through the window, I had read every word. I was exhausted, hollowed out, but something had shifted inside me. The fear was still there, the doubt was still there, but underneath it, A tiny, hard kernel of something else was forming. Resolve. I knew I couldn't make the decision sitting in the house, surrounded by ghosts. I needed to see the land. I needed to touch the soil she had fought so hard to keep. I put the letters carefully back in the box, locked it, and put the key in my pocket. Then I went outside. The morning air was cool and crisp, alive with the sound of birds. The rising sun cast a golden light over the chaos of the fields, turning the dew on the spiderwebs into a million tiny jewels. It was a mess, but it was a beautiful mess. I started walking. I followed a path that was barely visible, winding its way past the skeletal greenhouses. I peered inside one. The metal tables were still there, rusted and overturned. A few stubborn vines had snaked their way through the broken panes and were climbing the frames, their green leaves a stark contrast to the rust. It was decay, but it was also life, tenacious and unruly. I walked further, to the edge of the property, where the fields met a line of dark woods. There was an old barn there, its red paint almost completely gone, one of its big doors hanging off its hinges. It looked even more decrepit than the house. I hesitated, then pushed my way inside. The air was thick with the smell of hay and rot and animal ghosts. Light streamed in through gaps in the roof, illuminating swirling dust. Most of it was empty, just debris and collapsed stalls. I was about to turn back when I noticed something. In the far corner, the floorboards were a different color, newer, or just less weathered. I knelt down. One of them felt loose. I wedged my fingers under the edge and pulled. It came up with a groan of old nails. And there, in the dark space beneath, was another box. This one wasn't a small cash box. It was a heavy wooden chest, bound with iron straps. It wasn't locked. My heart was pounding as I lifted the lid. Inside, there were no letters. There were ledgers, old cloth-bound accounting books. I opened the first one. The pages were filled with my grandmother's handwriting. It was a record of the farm's business, going back 30 years. I saw entries for seed orders, for market sales, for repairs. It was the story of a thriving business. Then the entries changed. About 16 years ago, the sales stopped. The entries became about debt. There was Silas's name, a starting figure that made my blood run cold. And then a series of payments. Small, agonizingly small amounts, recorded every month. Paid S, $200. Paid S, $150. It was a ledger of her servitude. Underneath the ledgers was a folder. I opened it. It was filled with documents about Oak Ridge Holdings, newspaper clippings about their aggressive expansion, letters they had sent to Lena with escalating offers, and printouts of internal company emails somehow obtained discussing their strategy. Acquire the Vance property by any means necessary, one read. It's the key to the whole valley. My grandmother wasn't just holding on. She was fighting. She was gathering intelligence. She knew they were predators. And then, at the very bottom of the chest, I found it. A small, heavy canvas pouch tied with a leather cord. I opened it. Inside, nestled in cloth, were rolls of cash. Old bills, tightly bound. I counted it, my hands shaking. It wasn't a fortune. It was $10,000. Tucked into the pouch was one last note on a brittle scrap of paper. 4 words in her familiar script. For the soil, grow. That was it. That was the moment. The $10,000 wasn't enough to pay the taxes. It wasn't a magic solution. But it wasn't meant to be. It was seed money. It was a vote of confidence. It was her last earthly possession, saved over God knows how many years, left from me not to escape, but to begin. For the soil, grow. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an instruction, a legacy. I stood up, the cash heavy in my hand, the developer's predatory emails burning in my mind. The choice was no longer there. There was only one path. It was the hard path, the impossible path, but it was the only one that mattered. I walked out of the barn and into the sunlight, my decision made. I took out my phone. The battery was low, but it had enough for one call. I dialed the number on the business card. It rang twice. "Davies?" His voice was crisp. "Mr. Davies, it's Ilara Vance." "Ilara? Have you had time to think?" "Yes," I said, my voice clear and steady, without a trace of the doubt that had plagued me for days. "I've made a decision." "And?" "I'm not selling." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of him breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The professional reserve was gone. It was replaced by a quiet, deep warmth. "Good," he said. "I was hoping you'd say that. Your grandmother would be very proud. Now, let's talk about how we're going to fight these bastards." The next few weeks were a blur of motion. The decision was made, but the mountain was still there to be climbed. The 90-day clock was ticking louder than ever. Mr. Davies was a godsend. He explained that the $10,000, while not enough to clear the lien, was enough to file a stay with the county and propose a payment plan. It showed intent. It bought us time. He started digging into Oak Ridge Holdings, using the documents Lena had collected as a starting point. "Your grandmother was building a case, Ilara," he told me over the phone. "She was documenting their harassment, not just of her, but of other farmers in the area. This is more than just a real estate transaction." While he fought the legal battle, I fought the physical one. The first thing I did was use a few $100s of the cash to buy supplies. Cleaning products, heavy-duty trash bags, work gloves, a new blade for a rusty scythe I found in the barn. I started with the house. For 3 days, I just cleaned. I scrubbed away the layers of dust and grime, washed the windows, aired out the musty rooms. It was back-breaking work, but with every surface I cleaned, it felt less like a tomb and more like a home. I found more traces of her everywhere. A recipe for rosehip jam tucked into a cookbook. A pair of worn gardening gloves on a shelf in the pantry. A faded photograph on the bedside table of a much younger Lena, holding a baby, me, and smiling, her face radiant. I was reclaiming the space from time, from neglect. I was making it mine. After the house was clean, I moved outside. I started with the greenhouse closest to the house. The frame was mostly intact, but the glass was a disaster. I spent a week carefully removing the broken shards and clearing out the debris inside. The tables were rusted, the irrigation pipes clogged with dirt. But as I worked, clearing away the dead leaves and tangled vines, I found something incredible. In a sheltered corner, protected from the worst of the elements, a single rose bush had not only survived, but thrived. It had grown wild, climbing up the rusty frame, and it was covered in small, deep red blossoms. The scent was intoxicating. A blackwood rose, the kind the farm had been famous for, according to Lena's ledgers. It had survived for over a decade, untended. It was a sign, a stubborn, beautiful, thorny sign. The work was lonely. The silence of the farm was immense. But it wasn't the crushing silence of the city. It was a living quiet, filled with the sound of wind and birds, and my own labor. I made a trip into Havenwood, the small town a few miles down the road. It was a place that time seemed to have mostly forgotten. A main street with a general store, a post office, and a diner. I went into the store to buy seeds and some basic tools. The man behind the counter was old, with a weathered face and suspicious eyes. "You're the girl staying out at the old Vance place," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. "I'm Alara, Lena's granddaughter." His expression didn't change. "Heard you were back. Folks thought that place was gone for good." He rang up my purchases. "Oak Ridge has been sniffing around every property in this valley, pushing people out." He looked at the packet of seeds in my hand. They were for simple vegetables. Carrots, lettuce, beans. "That soil out there is good," he said, almost grudgingly, "if you know what you're doing." It wasn't a warm welcome, but it wasn't hostile either. It was a flicker of acknowledgement, a seed of community. One afternoon, a sleek black car I didn't recognize came up the driveway. My stomach tightened. A man in an expensive suit got out. He was young, slick, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "Alara Vance," he said, extending a hand I didn't take. "Markham from Oak Ridge Holdings. I just wanted to come out personally and congratulate you on your inheritance." The condescension was thick. "We've renewed our offer. In fact, we've increased it. 250,000. We'll handle all the tax business, all the legal. You just sign, and you can walk away from this mess." He gestured dismissively at the house, at the fields. I looked at him. Then at the single rose blooming in the greenhouse, at the clean windows of the house, at my hands, which were covered in dirt and small cuts. "This isn't a mess," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "It's my home, and it's not for sale." His smile vanished. "The county will take it, you know. That tax bill isn't a joke. Our offer is your only real option." "I have a lawyer," I said. "Any further communication can go through him." For a second, a flash of real anger crossed his face. Then he smoothed it over, putting his smarmy smile back in place. "Have it your way. The offer stands. For now." He got back in his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind. The confrontation left me shaken, but also strangely exhilarated. I had faced the dragon, and I hadn't flinched. The threat was no longer an abstract number on a piece of paper. It had a face, and I had told it no. That evening, I didn't work. I was sore and exhausted. I made myself a simple dinner of bread and cheese and sat on the newly swept porch swing, the one whose squeak I remembered from childhood. I watched the sun go down, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and pink. The light caught the wild, overgrown fields, and for a moment they looked like a sea of gold. I thought about the word inheritance. When Mr. Davies first said it, it meant a windfall, an escape, a lottery ticket. I had been so angry that my grandmother had kept this supposed treasure from me while we struggled. But I was wrong. The inheritance wasn't the land itself, or its monetary value. The inheritance was the story. It was the truth hidden in the letters. It was the legacy of resilience I found in the ledgers. It was the stubborn rose blooming in the ruins. My grandmother hadn't left me a solution. She had left me a choice. She had left me a fight. And by doing so, she had given me something far more valuable than money. She had given me a purpose. She had given me a place to put down roots, literally and figuratively. For 2 years, I had been a ghost, a file in a cabinet, a body in a bed that wasn't mine. I had defined myself by what I had lost. But sitting there, on that porch, with dirt under my fingernails and the smell of the land all around me, I felt solid. I was not just a survivor of a sad story. I was the beginning of a new one. I was Ilara Vance. I was Lena's granddaughter, and this was my farm. The fear of failure was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. The fight with Oak Ridge was just beginning. The work ahead was monumental. But for the first time in my adult life, and maybe for the first time ever, I felt a deep, unshakable sense of hope. Not a fragile flicker, but a steady, burning flame. I wasn't just inheriting a property, I was inheriting a chance to grow. So, here we are. The story isn't over. In many ways, it's just begun. The legal battle with Oak Ridge is ongoing. The payment plan for the taxes is in place, but it's a heavy weight every single month. Every day is a struggle, a new challenge. Clearing the fields, rebuilding the greenhouses, learning how to be a farmer from my grandmother's old books. Some days, the weight of it feels like too much. Some days, I look at the sheer scale of what needs to be done, and I want to just sit down and cry. But then, I look at my hands. They're not the hands of a foster kid anymore. They're calloused and strong. They're the hands of a person who builds things, who grows things. And I remember my grandmother's words. Everything wants to grow, Ilara. You just have to give it a chance. A little bit of light, a little bit of water, and a reason. I found my reason buried in a box of old letters. What I inherited wasn't just a farm. It was the truth. The truth that I was not abandoned, but protected. That I was not forgotten, but loved with a fierceness that crossed years of silence. And that's a truth worth fighting for. The most important thing I discovered here wasn't the secret stash of cash or the evidence against the developers. It was the realization that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you choose to build. It's a place you fight for. It's the soil you decide to cultivate, even when it's full of rocks and weeds. My story is far from a fairy tale ending, but it's real, and it's mine. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight for your own place in the world, I hope you'll join our community to see if we can really bring Blackwood back to life. And what does home mean to you? What have you fought to protect? I'll be reading because every one of our stories is a seed, and together we can grow a garden.